we've got about an hour, and I have a few things I want to draw on to illustrate, but the most important thing for the time is let's just talk and interact with this. If you go out to the internet and you Google, you know, how to present or common tips or whatever, there's two things you'll observe. One, there is a gazillion things out there that tells you how to not suck at presenting, right? And how often do you go to presentations and a lot of those same habits are repeated? So, you know, I don't want to repeat everything to you that you might otherwise find out there on the internet, but I will share some things that I think I've learned along the way. So, Dan, can you flip over to what we were just opening there from EDUCAUSE? Number one, your first enemy of a good presentation is generally the template someone gives you to use. Okay, so I asked Dan to pull here. So if you go to the EDUCAUSE website, if you happen to be presenting, this is a very common thing. Someone has made a template for you to present from. I never do that, ever, because they almost always suck to build from. They have embedded in them all the wrong things for what I think you need to do to be a good speaker. So great, use their slide. If they want pretty-wear slide for the conference you're at or what you're doing, that's fair. They're trying to sew this together a little bit. But beyond that, almost nothing in there is valuable to you. So if you click on any of the presenting tools, you know, Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever, and you go to their default templates, one of the things that's the most dominant structure is what? Title and bullets. And people fall into this trap over and over and over again, turning that into their speaker notes. And then what happens? You or your slides are redundant, you know, and you see people doing this and all of that. So the enemy number one is the template. And if you're not sure what to do, start with a blank one that has nothing in it. Point number two, if you're going to be presenting to an audience, you know, like this, in general, a dark template is better than, a dark background is better than a light one. People can read further away, they understand better, so you'll notice a lot of times I'll start with something black. Totally fine to have some white in there too, but I encourage you start with something black, put white text on it, and go from there. Point number three, if you don't really know how to use PowerPoint or Keynote, learn, because they can do some great stuff. There's a lot of little tools in there, lots of little things that you can do, but learn how to use them so that you know the tools that are available to you. So I've made a few comments actually on this. Dan, take that out of present mode and just flip down a couple. And here, so this is typical. I am not picking on our friends at EDUCAUSE because you see this everywhere. I get invited to go speak somewhere, and then they want to send me a template, and of course we laugh about that. And then they say, well, Tina, Brad needs to have his slides in a week before the conference. And then she has a bah-ha-ha-ha-ha laugh that you should hear sometimes. You know, and I always tell them, literally, they will get my slides generally morning of. And the reason for that is take advantage of anything that may happen that you want, that you can make your presentation fresh at the last moment. Maybe there was a comment from a speaker the day before at the conference. Maybe you got up that morning and, you know, happened to be reading the newspaper, and right there on USA Today or the Wall Street Journal or whatever your flavor of news is, you know, you saw something that's relevant to what you're going to say. You know, you don't want that all cemented before you get there. I know it drives program people crazy, but trust me that in the end, you're there to be the presenter. They're not there to optimize their lives. I don't mean that with disrespect, but you've got that moment from the audience. So when you look at this EDUCAUSE template here, again, you see blank, it's on white, which does make it easier to print. That's one of the things for using a white background. It makes it easier to print. You see it goes into this stuff. They've got a closing slide at the end that's fine, but that is probably your greatest enemy right there. So don't fall into the trap of doing that. So we've talked a little bit about what you prep for before you get there. Another thing then in presenting is move with purpose. How often have you seen somebody dancing the whole time they're presenting? I mean, sometimes you just get fatigued watching them. I just want to go, stop. So you also don't, you're not trying to do this the whole time, not overly formal, but you do want to move with purpose. So purpose can have several things. So while you're presenting, you may be walking through and then you want to move if you need to point to something or have a laser pointer. But also particularly if it's not too large of a room, you want to move with purpose in the room. So let's just say Tina decides to ask me a question. What do I want to do? Am I going to move over here to really express interest and try to have this conversation, understand her better? Okay, or should I pull back here when she's talking? Which seems the right answer? Generally, what I want to do is draw her into the audience. So I may need to step forward a little bit to signal, a little bit of focus with that person, but this is not a one-to-one private conversation. I want her not to feel like it's just that moment, with me as a presenter. So I want her to feel like she's talking to you while she's asking that question. And if you get closer to someone, often they will speak in a softer voice. Hopefully they will speak in a softer voice if you get really close. But in general, if you keep some distance from them, you're also signaling to that person to speak up a bit more as they talk. So audience engagement and where you move is very important as well. The words I would say, just move with purpose. Ensure that when you're moving from here to here or here to here or whatever, that you're moving with purpose. Hands matter, of course. Not going to present here, but you have seen people literally putting on the whole hand show the whole time they're going. That can be distracting as well. So I want to jump into walking through just 2 or 3 little presentations that I've done, and we're just going to go through some of the first slides, and I want to talk to you about how I approach doing them and choices that were made. At least one of them you've seen. Dan, let's pull up the one. I think it's already teed up, the GE one. So this was put together literally on a Saturday and a Sunday at the W Hotel in Chicago ahead of a session that I did for GE. And it took a lot of time to get this all put together. Dan will tell you one of the biggest problems for me, one of the biggest challenges for me is not getting the show put together. It's I've got to get clear in my head, what's the story? Where are we going? And there's just a moment when something's coming up, it will click. And these two will tell you it is often far too close to the speaking event for when it really finally clicks with me. But I can sit there all weekend or day or evening and just stare, trying to figure out what story I'm trying to tell. And I can put a bunch of stuff together and I feel very uninspired about it. But then when I really, I get the story in mind of where I'm going, then the visuals fall in pretty fast. And it makes telling the story easier because I've mentally bought myself into the story. It's not that, oh, okay, here's 3 things I need to talk about, but I've figured the narrative. So the purpose of this one, we're going to flip through this. Where's the clicker? There it is. Okay. This is not really giving you the whole presentation. It's looking at things that we did. So this was with a corporate audience. Here you can see the title of what it's for. And I teed them up early. Here's where we're going. Now notice this isn't in bullet form of I'm going to tell you this, and then I'm going to tell you this, and I'm going to tell you this. I'm starting off with a touchstone of pictures. I'm going to tell you about IU and some of the bits and bytes of running that. I have 5 little stories I'm going to tell you and try to illustrate some of what we do. And then I'm going to do some reflections on being a professor and being the CIO and what we've learned about that along the way. So here we go. Point number one. Notice the little symbol up there, 1. All that is about an 84-point just character. You go find the special symbol, you blow it up to 80 points. So there we have a big number 1. Here's the context. Little diagram, we're a big place, we do a lot of stuff. And so we're not reading this. They're reading that, and I'm saying we're a big place and we do a lot of stuff. That's what we're talking about. And they're seeing that. Then say we're a big shop, a lot of people here. This is roughly how we're organized. The only point that slide makes, there's nothing there to be read in detail, is that we've got IT somewhat soup to nuts at IU. We've got administrative systems, we've got research systems, we've got classrooms, we've got cybersecurity, and that's just an illustration to back up that point as we go. Then I started walking through here. Let me back that up. When you're trying to take a slide and go deeper into it, building on top of it is a way to do it. So you'll notice that when we made the shift to this all threats perspective with Mark Bruin's appointment there, I started to illustrate some of the organizational changes that we made along the way. And so then I could just quickly narrate them through these shifts and what was happening there. This is where the money comes from, this is where it goes. We're recycling a lot of money. We do a bunch of cuts. So the source of the money, we cut it internally. What do we do with it? We plow it back into a plan. And what are the outcomes? We've recycled about $120 million. Now notice, that looks a lot like the bullet template format. But I didn't use any of the bullets that everyone is often sick of or that look like speaking notes. But the logical flow is source, use, and outcomes. You say, okay, now what are you doing putting up something like that? Well, now we're getting in a little more detail because I've been telling this story about IU and how we've taken on more things over time. We haven't gone for extra money that much in terms of raising, quote, taxes on schools. We cut and reallocate a lot. So they said, well, you know, you're really perceived to be a super centralized IT shop. And then I said, well, you know, we're really not. When you look more carefully, it's about 62%, about 2/3 is spent with our shop. And about 1/3 is spent at schools and departments. And I think that's right. And what I talked to them about is at many other universities, that's the opposite. It's going to be closer to about 35 to 40%, maybe as in a shared service organization like UITS, and the 60% or more is over in edge services. And we're able to do a whole lot because of that 10-15% slider in the middle. It makes a lot of difference. So I rolled through a few illustrations there, but this is what then started to walk them through the 5 stories. So here we go. Notice different colors, different numbers. Again, that's just 1, 2, just raised up to a big font size. And so many cases. So here are some little cases where for each of these, is it about the behavior? Is it about how the organization was designed? These things come together. So here we go. You know, number 1, finding IT services, reinforcing the color at the top, reinforcing the number 1. So when people kind of doze off for a second, they check their phone, they're looking back up, they see where we're at in telling the narrative. So a little illustration, we've done cool stuff, we created 1. Now, I wanted them to illustrate and see blow that up. So you got something in particular you want to focus on. You know, just all I did, came down here and did a little screen grab of it, pulled it up there, blew it up, and drew a couple of lines to it. So then they could see how that thing works. Okay, now we're going to story number 2. Walk them through, blah, 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 story number 2, build, fixing the textbook model. Now story number 3. So I'll stop there. But you see the little cues that you put in to help the audience come along that journey with you. Let me pause for a question while Dan tees up the curves, if you will. Questions? Yes.
So I'm all about the
Okay.
I'm all about the minimal slides, but then I feel like afterwards I don't have anything to give to someone that maybe was trying to follow along. So I've been including my speaker notes because I put a lot of detail there, but I didn't know what your recommendation was.
Yeah, I rarely ever use the speaker notes because I just usually don't speak with much of anything in front of me. But I think using the speaker notes is a great place to put that kind of information if you're going to share your slides afterwards, so people can have access to it. And I have, since starting as a professor, I've always had a promiscuous policy with slides. I don't think my value is in owning any particular slide deck. My value is in creating the next one before they do. And so that's the way I think of it. So I've always just given this stuff away. Notice here, by the way, and this is on the bottom of all slide decks unless I just miss it. And we even have a little newer version I'll show you in a moment. But I put a Creative Commons attributions license. Just go out to Creative Commons, and you can pick which license you want. But that's a very clear signal to anyone. You can pick the slide deck up. You can use it. It'd be nice if you say something came from Brad, but there's no commercial restrictions on it, and that's been my take. And if you want to provide somebody more information, speaker notes is a great place to do it. Okay, so this slide deck, some of you may have seen this. I presented a portion of this at the EDUCAUSE session, I guess 2014. The other thing I try to do, and it's pretty visible here, but when you go pick up images on the internet, I try to always document where they came from. And so I'll often just put it in a really gray or pretty blackish tone, or if it's white on white, I'll put it in white. But then you can Control A on a slide to select everything, and then you'll see it there. Then all you gotta do is change the font on it, and that way I can always remember where something came from or track it down and try to be fair in use. So notice the title slide here. It's meant to be intriguing a little bit. This glass chessboard, curves, speeding up on curves. So that's the theme in which it was done. This style of presenting is a lot of black and a few words. This has been used a lot. And I lead off with just a tease right from the beginning. So I'm about to tell you a story. And the story is curves are interesting. And I want you to think about that because they're not boring, like predictable linear lines. Now, I didn't click, I advanced the slide, but you saw how that appeared piece by piece and drew you into it. Now, I'm going to make the point of, with a linear line, if I give you X, I can know Y. And they change over time, and you know where they're actually at. But not curves. Curves take a more interesting shape. They may look like this, they may look like that, and we love this march to the northeast corner and all. Then in this slide, I would say, but not all curves are like this, some are like that. But I'm a business professor, so we assume away reality because it's easier to talk about curves that look like this. So with curves, it's a little harder to know that when you're given an X, what Y will happen over time down the way. So notice all we've done so far is bait the audience. They don't know exactly where this is going. It's a setup. It's trying to pull them in to the core thesis of speeding up on curves. Well, let me tell you a little bit about curves. So think about that main thing that you're talking about. Are you talking about rolling out a system? Are you talking about, a technical upgrade to something? Are you talking about the story your team went through to get from here to there? So, what's the hook that you can put up front to bait the audience a little bit? I don't mean bait in a bad way. I mean to lure them into the story that you want to tell them as you go. So here's another illustration. Look, I couldn't use Photoshop for my life or anything sophisticated in graphics tools. So everything you're seeing here is the most clumsy of editing, unless Dan did it. So most of this stuff is using just editors and things you find in PowerPoint itself. So here's one. And so again, notice the tease. October 1st, 2007, there's a stock is trading at $247. And 2008, roughly 13 months later, it's trading at $53. Not so good. That's the way I usually pick individual stocks. And so look at the curves that happened in that period of time. So when would you jump on that curve? Are you still waiting for it to get better? Well, if you were waiting for it to get better and you didn't jump here and you waited a little bit, that probably turned out to be a good thing. If you waited very long, that turned out to be a very bad thing over time. And this is the thing with curves, you just don't know. Now, what's interesting is, if we pull back the lens, that's the same graph you just saw. But here's what it looks like when you spell it out over about 5 years of, or I guess 10 years of time. Look at all the curves that happened there. Anyone know what stock this is? Goldman Sachs. Isn't that interesting? A marquee, venerable investment bank name. Look at their stock over this period of time. Now, Mr. Buffett understood this very, very well. And notice he invested $5 billion and about 3 years later had made a return of $2.1 billion on it. Isn't that remarkable? Yeah, and so this drives the point home that few investors capitalized on that curve. And here's the quote from Warren Buffett's, one of his most famous statements, and that is, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. I heard him on an interview when the economy was melting down, and he said, this is really a direct quote, he said, well, I would never let Berkshire Hathaway cash on hand drop below $10 billion because I'd never want to be dependent on the kindness of strangers if I needed money. And so he was able to capitalize on the curves because he had cash on hand to run in and buy when everybody else was freaking out. So illustrating here to close this section out, drawing the audience to think about who are our heroes in managing the curves. As we start thinking about heading into the future, a few examples there of tech leaders, they foresaw and shaped the curves, and now I take the audience into what are the curves confronting higher ed. And without playing the slide forward much further, you know, one of the key things that's happened that this last 15 years that has redefined education is, as a society, we have decided that a higher education is a private good to be paid for by an individual student and his or her family, and much less of a public good that is provided with state support and state subsidy. And there's a whole lot of consequences that have come of that. But that's the fundamental decision in the curve that we're facing there. Okay, Dan, you want to load up the 2012, whichever, yeah, this was Statewide 2012. Questions or comments as we're getting this loaded up? And start on slide 3 there. Yeah, pop that through. Some of you saw this from 2012. This is a little different style of presenting, and so here's really where we want to start. And I'm not clicking, oh, actually I want to back this up because what I want you to see is what it's doing here. So it starts with a blank slide there. It's while I'm talking and starting to invite the audience in, it's coming into a little bit brighter focus, and then it goes color, and then it provides the word aspire. So all that would be going on behind me while I'm talking. You see again another form of the tease. A little bit of the tease, a little bit of the bait. People are wondering where this is going. This particular slide deck was put together heavily just from images on the internet. And you can do a whole slide talk now, depending on your topic, with just full slide images and a few words. You want to get the audience focused a little bit on what you're saying, but they're just there to support you. So here, if some of you are at Statewide in 2012, you recall I said, well, let's look in the rearview mirror. We've got some progress along the way, achievements, a lot more achievements, more and more achievements. along the way. And see, just sticking with this, there's a journey. And so, yeah, then a lot of images around roads after that. You know, analyze the road, where we're going, talked about the road ahead, anticipate, and kept coming back to this core image. So if you go through this slide deck very far, what you'll see is full screen images and just words. Now, you made reference to the number of slides in a deck. Who is our speaker we had about 2 years ago? Very colorful guy. Harper Reed, thank you. Yes. So Harper, for his talk, I think he had 200 slides. Yeah, it was something about like that. Because these were single words just flying by with excellent timing of what was happening and just an illustration. Now, if you're trying to illustrate the technical details of implementing a system and the protocols and everything that goes on, that style probably doesn't work. But if you're trying to tell a story about a leadership journey, about your team's journey, what happened along the way, images and single words, I think, can work very, very well in helping to bring the audience along. So with that, let's pause, and I promised I would not talk this whole time in presenting to you, and would use a good bit of it to take your questions in what concerns you about speaking or how you approach putting your slide deck together. What concerns you, and what might I offer in comment?
Getting everything memorized. Or memorize enough that you can go off.
Yeah.
Constantly down.
Right. Let me repeat that question for our remote participants. The question is, so one of the things that's difficult before a session is how do you get everything memorized? You know, but particularly if there's details, if you're presenting technical details and all. So the first thing I begin with, and again, forgive me a short story. My speaking career, public speaking career, began in 4th grade in 4-H. And I remember visibly shaking while doing that. And made it on through a few competitions and such along the way, and went to Washington, D.C. There's a National 4-H Citizenship short course. They had to warn us out during the day. I don't remember what we were doing. So they dragged us all into the cafeteria about, I don't know, it must have been about 9 or 9:30 at night. A bunch of tired kids, were sophomores or something about that time. And this little old lady in a pink sweater came in and sat down about like this. And her name was Dorothy Emerson. And she went by Dot Emerson. I remember that so clearly because it's one of the most influential things I ever heard. She essentially either hypnotized us all that night or mesmerized us, I'm not sure. But she convinced everyone in that audience that when you are public speaking, it will come. It will come. And she talked about extemporaneous speaking. Most of the time you're giving a planned speech. But she really convinced you that it's not your task to think, okay, I've made some notes here somewhere. So my job right now is to take all this pre-planning of notes and all the clever things that I thought I would say and be sure that with each slide, I say all the clever things that I had thought of, or I get everything out. But rather, when it's your turn to speak, tell them the story. Tell them things you already know. And again, whether it was hypnotism or what, my speaking changed dramatically. And I say hypnotism, that's a joke. It was not that. But you have been asked to present or speak because you know something about a particular topic. In many cases, someone has reached out and asked you to do it. In other cases, you may have participated in some process like at EDUCAUSE or Internet2 or even statewide saying, I want to present. And some people looked over it and said, yeah, she'd be great at that, or he'd be great at that. So turn down your reliance on pre-preparation of your notes. Think about your story that you want to tell them. And think about your experience along the way and what it is you think that they're going to want to learn from it. And if you can stand up and tell them that story with whatever some appropriate visuals are to support it, you're going to do fine. It's not your task to convey your notes. It's your task to tell the story that will engage them. Just don't tell them a boring story, okay? Here.
I've seen presentations where there's been like 4 or 5 people involved. How many presenters is too many presenters?
More than one.
More than one, all right. And then how would you transition to the next presenter? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so if there's going to be a panel, if you're ever asked to participate on a panel, this is a really important guidance. I'm trying to recall where it first came to me, but golly, I should know. The point was, and I have used this over and over again, the most important thing for a successful panel is to never have a pre-panel meeting to plan it. Because when you have pre-panel meetings, what you start to do is divvy it up into separate presentations. It takes the spontaneity out of it. It takes the engagement out of it. And where did we do this? Over at School of Informatics and Computing, they had Luddy Fest not long ago, and we had several dignitaries in, and they asked me to moderate the panel. And so I applied this rule, and they were terrified by doing it this way. But what I did do in planning the panel, I had about 16 slides, and I made a cheat sheet. A lot of people don't know this, but we've got PowerPoint running here now. You got the keyboard handy. So, if I hit, 5 and enter, that's going to jump to the 5th slide. Now, that may be the 5th slide being the same in this particular deck. But if I hit 33, enter. And so by hitting a slide number, it will go right to it. So while this panel is going on, I also had them give me just a wireless 10-key pad. Just like a keyboard, and plugged it in. So I would turn and ask a panelist something over here, and he would start talking about the role of the Renaissance engineer. Well, I had a slide that was really good visual of that, and I had my little cheat sheet, which I'd kind of memorized. It's only 15 things, so I'd hit 4 and enter, and the slide for the Renaissance engineer just popped up while he was talking. And then something else would go a different direction, and then I'd hit 7 and enter. You've seen me do that at Statewide sometimes too, where we don't know what visuals we're going to use. I'll create a little inventory, maybe a little cheat sheet if I need it, and then pop it up. So in a multi-person presenting situation, that's what I think is best. Have a moderator, have several panelists who are interesting. Do not overscript. You talk about this, and then I'll talk about this, and then I'll talk about this, but do it a little bit more interview style, and even panelists going back and forth to each other. If it's moderator, panelist A, then panelist B, then panelist C. Then moderator asks a question, then it's panelist C, then B, then A. That's boring. It's boring. So this is a little bit, it's a long answer, but I'm kind of passionate about this. View someone trying to script your panel to be dull, the same as that evil of that PowerPoint template. Push back. Try to take charge a little bit. I failed to mention this on the way in. Don't be shy to take charge of the room, too. You come in and the room is arranged wrong, or the podium's on the wrong side, or they tell you, someone tells you you've got to do something you don't want to do. Within reason, I push back. No, rearrange the room. They say, well, we can't have a chair. I say, yeah, we can move that table. Let's just move the table and do it. So don't be afraid to take charge of the room either. Don't be afraid if you're in a multi-person situation to take charge of the format if you're able to do it. If you are put into a series of multiple presenters, and it is going to be sequenced presentations, it's not going to be a panel or anything interactive, then I do think you have to talk to each other and get real clear on the time frame. The other thing you have to do, absolutely unequivocally, roll all the slides into one deck. Do not have slide transitions between speakers. You lose the audience, it's distracting, it makes you look like morons that you haven't really prepared this. And you know, you can take multiple PowerPoint decks, even that have disparate backgrounds and templates, merge them and keep all that intact. You don't slaughter that stuff, but take charge when situation arises. Oh, back here, Chris.
If your content is more, less so a story or a point that you're trying to get across, but you're introducing new content and you're trying to disseminate stuff, less is more. Is it okay to go more free form and be representing the information maybe before you hit the bullets, but then the non-bullet bullets are there later to reinforce? Or do you want to keep with the content and
I think to the point, you're always telling a story. Even like you and I have worked together on the Decision Support Initiative and Academic Metrics 360, AM 360, you could go down to micro print on that, of all the details and stuff that it has. But you're always telling a story. So we're trying to get school department chairs, deans, associate deans, skilled up on this fairly technical product and capabilities and lots of small numbers and graphs and things. So what you do is you can't show them all of that in one screen. So you pop up an AM 360 slide that's got like 4 or 5 graphs embedded in it, a few numbers, and then do what I did a moment ago with you grab a piece of it and you make it grow. And then you're talking about that, and then you may make it go back down and grab another piece of it. I do think when you come out of a series of visuals like that, if you want to reinforce a few things, say, so what we saw here was we were able to pick the department, we were able to pick what years we were looking at, and what we learned was the cost per credit hour. And if you know the cost per credit hour, you can make staffing decisions that help with your unit's goals. See, I think that kind of thing is okay to reinforce that way. Then you go back into the next visual.
I want to ask a little bit about cadence. You start off your presentations very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Slow.
Well, you do get there, right? I mean, you start out bringing your audience in and being excited, and then, for example, you take a seat and you do a little storytelling. I find I often either rush all the way through my presentation or I don't finish it up because I'm too slow. What do you suggest?
Yeah. Key point here. It is the audience and the time they've got, and it is you. You own that thing. That thing does not own you. And so that is why, I mean, the worst thing you want to see is somebody get, 10 slides in, they've had a couple of good questions along the way, or, they've shared some things, and they look and go, oh my gosh, we've only got 3 minutes left. So I got 17 more slides I need to give you. Boom, 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 boom. Well, that doesn't really matter. And I think it's one of the worst things in the world is when someone's printing and go, well, okay, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It's like, well, idiot, why did you put it in your slide deck? If that doesn't matter. Now, what you can do is, remember, you're not bound by sequence. A lot of people think, you really are bound by sequence. So you're into slide 7 and somebody starts asking you something about, a slide that's way down the way. You got 2 choices. You can go, okay, can you just hold that question? I'm going to get there, which may be the right answer. Or you may want to say, I think that's good. Let me just jump ahead because this is where you're going and this is a good point. So I'm going to reach over there and hit, 1-7 and jump ahead a few slides, talk to them about that. And then I'm going to turn back over here and hit 8 and enter and go right back to where I was. Sometimes I'll go right up through and hit 16. And while I'm talking, I hit 18 and go right past the one and they never saw the same slide again. So a little cheat sheet that you have there for those slide numbers. The other thing is I'll often memorize section numbers. So I'll know, okay, slide 1, 2, 3, 4, this is kind of the warm up. Okay, the first point I'm really going to make to lay out kind of the agenda is slide 5. And so I'll remember that. And then I'll remember, okay, we're going to start the little vignettes I talked about a moment ago. Okay, that's slide 14. And so I'll have a couple of those hooks in my mind. And so I can jump around pretty easily as things happen. You're always better to prepare fewer slides than you think you need for the block of time than prepare too many and not get your audience through your story. You know, you don't want to hear the whole story of Little Red Riding Hood and then not know what happens, right? You know, you want to hear the whole story. And so if you want materials that you don't know they will or will not fit in the story, put them after your last slide, know the numbers. If that's number 27, then you can just jump there and pull it up. I do always begin, you saw generally some sort of a title slide, and that's usually my last slide as well. So that's slide number 1, and sometimes it's slide number 2 if you just want a black background sitting there. And you can do that another way, but it's usually the first slide, and then it might be slide 27, and then there's a few supplementals after it. The other thing to do as a presenter, and some people know this and some don't, is in the midst of something, you know, somebody, you know, asks you a question, you know, if you just hit the B key, it blanks the slide. And sometimes that can be good to bring focus. So if you're convenient enough when somebody says something, you just hit the B, you take the slide off. That's when you might step into the audience just a little bit more. It's a little tighter moment. They've asked something, particularly if they've asked something, let's say you're giving a talk and, you know, it's around team development. It's, you know, it's coaching that difficult team member. It's, you know, someone talks about a time when they really felt uncomfortable, sexual harassment at work or something. And it's a moment you want to personalize a little bit more. That's when you don't want the visual to back you up. You want the visual to go quiet. So that moment can be here rather than distracted. And then it also lets you pull back out of that moment when you turn the visuals back on. Okay. I thought you were going to give a rebuttal, giving as many times as you tried to facilitate me.
So one question is, do you always do PowerPoint, or have you tried other frameworks like Prezi or Swag?
You know, I have done Prezi a little bit. I used it the other day teaching teaching a case about a ship sinking in the 1600s. I don't find it generally superior. You know, a Prezi can be an interesting break out of the monotony of bad PowerPoint or Keynote. I don't know that a Prezi is a superior output to a skillful use of PowerPoint or Keynote.
And then one additional online question. So any tips to close a presentation in such a way as to leave some, if not all, of the audience with an urge to get back to you for more? So the call to action?
Yeah, boy, it varies so much by the title. Yeah, I think everyone heard it. How do you leave the audience wanting more or a bit of a call to action? I do think speeches, presentations have different purposes. So some are simply to inform, some are to convey a skill, some are a call to action in some way. So I do think, Dan, would you reload the curves slide deck, please? I do think hooking the story you were telling to the present and what comes next is one way of doing that. So if I jump in this one, I'm going to have to move around here a little bit because I haven't been in this deck in a while. So I just showed you this one. So we talked about curves, and I said, so here's these 4 captains of industry. They thought differently. They really changed an industry. They foresaw the curves, and they made all this stuff happen. And then I go ahead and give this deck. And there's a whole bunch of information in here along the way. And then finally, to get to the point here that's the hook again, at the end, if it can... Is it? Where do you see it? Here. Okay. So, yeah, let's see if this is it. So this is pulling out of the storytelling here. So we talked about this. So now here's a review. Chris, this is to your point. I hit a few textual things to sum this up for them here. Now, this is the decrescendo. This is pulling out of telling the story here. So curves are interesting, and since it's a tech audience, you know, especially at 100 gigabits per second. And so here's the hook for the future. So who will be those higher ed heroes who think differently going into the future? That was pulling them into a little bit of a call to action. Who will foresee the curves of what 100 gig era and the finances, change of finances of higher ed mean? They thought differently. They redefined an industry. They saved a college. They became the Oracle, not in the corporate sense, but the Oracle of education, not the Oracle of Omaha. So I think that's how you can pull someone in with a question to get them to see themselves in action coming out of it. What else?
Okay, I'll just.
Use your teaching voice, and I'll repeat it.
All right, so do you have any advice, concerning the audience here, do you have any advice on live demos?
Yeah, so the question is, do you have any advice on live demos? The number one thing is, can the audience see and understand it? You know, if the demo is not discernible from about row 15, then watching people click in a browser or a piece of software, it's a snooze fest pretty fast. So if you're going to use a demo, I strongly recommend just screen capture it. Playing, one, you're more confident it won't screw up if you do a short little movie video of capturing it. And two, if you do it that way, you can pause pretty easily and drop those annotations on the screen. Circle something and say, did you see this indicator change when it realized there was nothing in the cell in some way? So I would only do a demo if people in row 15 can discern what's going on. Daphne?
So I have had kind of a unique perspective on seeing you and some of the other people who presented statewide backstage before you go on. And one thing that has always struck me, I guess, as someone who is a less experienced presenter, is how laid back you guys all are back there. You are talking to each other about, and I mean, not just casual conversations, but in-depth, you know, technical kind of conversations, theoretical conversations, and then you walk on and start talking about your topic. Myself and most other people that I've seen, this is not the ritual that we have right before we go on to present. So my question for you is that something that simply comes with practice and comfort, or is that intentional? Do you actually feel that there's some benefit to distracting yourself before you go on, rather than going and doing centering techniques or hyperventilating or whatever?
I don't recommend hyperventilating before speaking. I don't know that it will help you a lot. No, I mean, to be fair, you know, I grew up in the cauldron of the MBA core classroom, and you know, it's either you survive or get killed there. So I have had thousands of hours of speaking. So yeah, that's it. I've just done it a lot, and I'm usually more interested in talking with people that we have backstage and getting to chit chat in the small moments available than in anything else. But I feel fairly comfortable. Once I've got the story clear in my head, I may be sweating bullets the night before, because these guys will tell you sometimes, like, Brad, you're not even close to having your story figured out yet. But once I've got my story figured out, I'm good after that.
Going back to stories, how do we shift our thinking for those of us who are, you know, used to telling the story, that are more, you know, inculcated in academia and quantitative PowerPoint and stuff like that?
Okay. Yeah, so how do you shift your thinking from informing to telling a story? Well, it takes a while to find that hook for what the story is. So, try a few things in your mind, like that whole notion of, for the conference that we had, We Aspire, that Keith and his team did the brilliant video for. I'm still so proud of that video. It took me a while to decide to use the road metaphor and then build the story around the road. But what I think you can do is just kind of think in your head, okay, what's the arc of this story? What's the beginning and the hook? What's the meat of this story? And where does it end? And if you think through that a little bit, then pull a colleague aside, preferably not the one you work with all the time who knows you, someone you may interact with less frequently, and just for coffee or whatever, just go, so here's how I'm thinking about this presentation. And so please give me some feedback. So I've thought of a couple of different ways of doing it, but I want to tell a story. And the way I want to pull the audience in is I'd like to say this and this, and this is kind of the visual I'm thinking. And then I want to tell them about this, and this is the arc of what happened, whether it's the hero's journey that you want to tell, that narrative, or it was a tragedy, what happened at the end. So what is the arc of the story, and then how do you bring them around in the end? And I really think you can do that even for technical topics sometimes. It may take a little more thinking. I did gloss over something that I think is hugely, hugely important, and I should have said this so up front. The story varies by audience. I can take the same slide deck and give two pretty different presentations from it for knowing the audience. A technical audience who tends to think and want to understand things perhaps more linearly because there's lots of detail, don't come in and talk only flowers and poetry to them because they may not find that very valuable. If you're talking to folks who are more general managers, et cetera, and they're not particularly skilled on the depth of technologies of the day, then going deep propeller head is probably not going to pull them along. So adapt your story to your audience. Bob, we'll let that be almost the last question, and I want to be respectful of your time. Okay, Bob, then to the back.
So to follow up on that answer, what if it's, say, a large conference and you don't know what the audience is going to be like? Do you try and, ski through the flags and touch on things that would be of interest to both?
That's absolutely right. So like if I'm presenting at EDUCAUSE, I am extremely sensitive. I will always refer to colleges and universities. That's a simple thing, but I'm not always going to say universities because some group, that's just a signal to them. Oh, there those R1 universities go again, thinking the rest of us don't, exist out there. Or even in an audience like that, I'm not going to go, well, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying, well, Marty Ringel, or refer to Reed College. I want to refer to other names. I want to refer to other sizes of institutions. I will make references, to community colleges. So yeah, you try to touch on points for that whole audience. That's a very, very, very important thing. I spoke at an IBJ, Indianapolis Business Journal event the other day, and what I really want, just some opening remarks that were not illustrated, but one of the things I really wanted to do is re-enroll that audience in being proud of and supporting their public research universities. So one of my first comments was, we're in a remarkable time. Purdue University, next year, will have their sesquicentennial, their 150th anniversary. Indiana will have our 200th in 2020, the year following. And I hope you are proud of your public research universities. You saw in the announcement of Infosys, Salesforce, I rattled through 3 or 4 companies. Every one of them named the research university talent pipeline in their press releases of why they chose Indiana. But so to that audience, I didn't want to come in and just go, you, rah, rah, because this was a large, diverse audience. I wanted to enroll them in the touchstones of supporting public universities. One more back here. Mm-hmm.
One last online question. So what was your single biggest aha moment about being a good presenter?
Okay, I think I know what it was. I got pulled in to teaching some corporate exec ed. And these are big dogs. I mean, these are people on boards of Fortune 500 companies and all. And, you know, I didn't flop there and they wanted more of it and got pulled in a little more. So I was feeling, you know, pretty good, kind of validated as an, you know, I teach the MBAs and not get chewed up. And that, like I said, that is a cauldron to survive in. And then, so now I'm out doing corporate exec ed. Well, this was going pretty well. And so they decided they wanted to run their entire top corporate worldwide board, the board of directors, through literally a 2-day intensive sheep dip training in IT and internet and where the world was going. And so these guys are all over the world. And so we did this with me sitting here and 4 of them sitting there. And for a day and a half, day and 3/4. And so, you know, this is, again, the CEO worldwide of a company, the CFO worldwide of a company. And also they needed to feel comfortable to ask questions because a lot of these guys don't want to go, well, I'm really stupid about this, so let me air how dumb I am. But I survived that and then did about 5 of those, 4 or 5 people at a time. And I think after that, I thought, because I'd already done some large audiences, I thought, all right, I'm tough enough to do this. I can survive. Thank you for spending the last hour of your day.